Good morning. What a joy to be together today to worship God from our hearts we've shared in this morning. What a great day to remember the love of God, and that God loves each and every one of us here today, as well as those online, as well as those in our neighborhood and all around this world. Glad to be sharing with you in this moment of worship today. Well, if you were able to join us last Sunday night for our lovely night at the park, you got to hear a little bit about some of my backyard adventures, shall we say, with the stump grinder and the sledgehammer. I just wanted to tell you all that many of you were quick to share with me how much talent it really takes to break a sledgehammer. And I just wanted you to know that I appreciate you seeing how talented I am. It's good to be seen and known that way. Well, this week brought more backyard adventures at my house, but of a different sort, because this week I got to try my hand for the very first time at using a pressure washer. Have you ever used one of these before? Pressure washer? It was so much fun using this pressure washer. I mean, seriously, how satisfying is this? So what I was working on my fence. My goal is to stain the fence. I want to do the whole thing. And I had heard that it's a good idea to pressure wash your fence before you stain it so that you're staining the wood and not the dirt. So I thought I can do that. Even I can do that. So I borrowed a pressure washer. I plug it all in, I rev it all up, the engine's humming and everything, and I think, this is just going to be a little formality. I'll wash this fence real quick, and then I'll get to staining the fence. And oh my goodness, I had immediately these two realizations. Maybe you know what they're going to be. Realization number one, I had no idea how much dirt was on that fence. I thought it was the color of the fence. It was the color of the dirt that I was seeing on that fence. And it was just like when I would get up there close with the pressure washer, just right up next to it and blast it with that water, it was a total transformation. It was a whole different fence hiding under there, under all that dirt. And I would just go little row by row, inch by inch, and wash it down with the water. It was like, just made it completely better. I was just blown away by how much dirt there was. That was the first thing I realized. The second thing I realized was related to that. I had no idea how long this task was going to take me. Because you do go inch by inch over each board and picket on the fence. I thought I would just wash it real quick and get to staining the fence. But man, this was a long, slow process. I worked for hours and looked up, and I had done maybe half of one section of fence. I'm trying to do the whole thing. And it makes sense. Because the way that pressure washer works, the power of it comes from getting real, real close. And that real focused energy, that focused beam of water is what makes it transform your fence into a whole brand new fence. But if the goal is to wash the whole fence, it's gonna take a while. That means a lot of close up time with that fence. And a lot of going inch by inch, post by post, all the way to the end of the line. And so as I stood there for hours, getting splashed in the face by this water, and I watched all that dirt wash away, I got to thinking about the love of God. I had a lot of time to think on my hands. I got to thinking about the love of God and the way that it is shown to us. I actually got to thinking not just about the love of God, but also about the love of our parents. Specifically about a mother's love. After all, today is Mother's Day. It's a day when we remember and honor our mothers and our grandmothers, as well as all of those folks, and we have many of them here, who serve in that role in our lives, even if they might not be our mother. Many spirituals and mothers and grandmothers reside in this church family. It's a time when we remember you too, those of you who have played that role in our lives. And as I was working on that fence this week, and I knew that this was going to be the day, and I knew what passage I was going to be looking at today, I kept thinking, there's something about this work that I'm doing that makes for a pretty good analogy. an analogy of God's love, and also an analogy of a mother's love. Because to me, one of the things that you moms do so incredibly, so very often, is that you offer that focused energy, that up-close attention and care, and you're willing to do what you need to do for your children. And so many mothers do that so very often with great endurance too, like day after day, milestone after milestone, fence post by fence post. And look, you moms do so many things so incredibly well, it would be wrong to try to reduce it to one or two things. But for today, if I could dwell on one or two things that are worthy of our thinking about today, it would be that the gift of your presence right up close and near us, and the gift of your attention over a long stretch of time, that is something that just transforms people's lives. It makes people better bit by bit and day by day. And when I think about that kind of love, it's a whole lot like God's love. So today, I want to say a word about that kind of love. And my message is really simple. It's that when God or when people like our mothers give this loving gift of their presence, this loving gift of their attention to us in our lives, that's something we ought to honor. That is worthy of honor. It's what I see in our passage for today. If you got a Bible, you can go ahead and be turning there. It's a favorite of mine from the Old Testament. A little chapter from Hosea. We spent the past month in one prophet, the prophet of Isaiah, a big long book, prophecy. We're turning our attention now to another one, the prophet Hosea. We're going to spend a little time today in this chapter, Hosea chapter 11. I chose this passage because it makes it really clear to me the resemblance between the best of a mother's love and God's love, and why that kind of love makes such a difference, why it's so worthy of our honor. So let's hear what the passage has to say. We read a bit of it a moment ago, but we're going to pick up now in verse 1 of the passage. Hosea 11, beginning in verse 1, it says, "When Israel was a child, I loved him." And that I speaking there, this is Hosea recording the voice of God saying this. So this is God saying, I loved Israel. When Israel was a child, I loved him. And out of Egypt, I called my son. But the more I called them, the more they went away from me. They kept sacrificing to the Baals and offering incense to idols. So this is what Israel does. Instead of honoring the one that loved them like a father, Israel here, instead of honoring God, they're giving their honor and love to other things. Things that don't love them back. I want you to really pay attention to this next part. Listen to how God is described in these next verses here. Yet it was I who taught Ephraim to walk. Ephraim's another name for Israel, talking about God's people. It was I who taught Ephraim to walk. I took them up in my arms. They didn't know that I healed them. I led them with cords of human kindness, with bands of love. I was to them like those who lift infants to their cheeks. This verse is kind of hard to translate. Sometimes it gets translated a yoke instead of a child, an infant. I think child makes more sense because of all the fatherly imagery going on here, but we'll talk about that in a minute. I was to them like those who lift an infant to their cheeks. I bent down to them and fed them. Now, in a minute, we'll read a little further in this chapter 2. But for right now, I just want to stop here powerful and tender picture of the love of our God. And it's a love that brings to mind many of the best aspects of a mother's love. I mean, these metaphors are drawn straight out of parenthood. Teaching a child to walk. Taking up a child in your arms. Caring for a child even when they're not really even capable of comprehending that you're the one taking care of them. Lifting an infant to your cheek. Bending down and feeding them. Like, these are all the stuff that parents do. It's parental love. It's maternal love. Like what many of us know so well from when we were children. Like Israel. And every one of these little snapshots of this parent-like love that God has for us, for God's people, it hits on those themes we were talking about. Like the gift of being present, being near, and the gift of being involved, sharing your attention, nearness, and involvement. I just give you one example here. Teaching a child to walk. How does one do that? How do you teach a child to walk? Probably down on the floor with them as their wobbly little legs try to figure it out. Maybe with a hand nearby to catch them or else to stabilize them as they learn to take those very first steps. You do it from up close. You give attention to it. This week I was reading about a list of animals that learn how to walk within like hours of when they're born. You know about this? Some of them within minutes or hours can walk or even run. And I was reading about this and thought, what a great opportunity to share some pictures of some cute baby animals with you this morning. So let me share with you some animals on this list. Baby giraffes. They learn how to walk within hours, even those big, long, wobbly legs. They're walking and running within hours of when they're born. Baby camels, maybe takes a little effort, learning how to walk. Baby zebras. Even cute little baby pigs. Isn't that cute? Learn how to walk within hours of when they're born. You know what was not on the list? Us. We were not on that list. Because it is a whole different thing, right? For a human being like us to learn how to walk. It is not innate. It is a long, slow process of transformation that is brought on by the gift of someone's presence, someone's attention to us. And almost everything in our lives is like that. Our development as people progresses from a point where we were just like completely, totally dependent, unable to help ourselves in any way. We cannot do anything that these verses talk about on our own when we were born, whether it's walk or feed ourselves or lift ourselves up. None of those things are things we can do on our own. We rely on someone else's presence, someone else's attention to become who we are. And God says, my love for you is such that I was the one you could depend on. I was the one who was there from the moment your wobbly legs took their first steps. I was the one who was constantly giving to you those gifts, that kind of love, expressed through nearness, expressed through attention, compassion, and care. Maybe that right there alone is the thing you need to hear this morning. This is what God's love is like for you. Even this very day, God loves you deeply. God is invested in your well-being. And like children who can do nothing on our own, we owe all that we have and all that we are to a God who loves us like that. And that's a love that's worthy of our honor. It's actually what makes this passage in Hosea so very urgent, is because what we find in this chapter is that even though God loved his children Israel in this way, they weren't giving him the honor that he should have been given for showing this kind of love. Remember what verse 2 said? It said that even though God loved Israel from childhood, still the more I called, the more they went away from me, sought after other gods, gave their honor to other things. Here's the kicker, though. Does this stop God from loving his children? In spite of all the intense feelings this must bring for a parent, God is a God whose love yet endures, and he refuses to give it up. So verse 8 of the passage, if you just go a few verses down, this is God resolving to keep on loving his children, even after they've turned away from him. How can I give you up, O Ephraim? How can I hand you over? My heart recoils within me at the thought of giving you up. My compassion grows warm and tender. It's yet another reason that God is worthy of our honor. Because God is not reactionary. He's not quick-tempered, a holder of grudges. God is described here like the parent who can't imagine ever turning his back on his children. It's like the father in the prodigal son parable, the one who's always watching out on the horizon, past the fence posts, see if his child's going to come home. Maybe that's what you need today. Maybe you need to know that God is always there wanting us to come back to him, and he's not going to give you up. Maybe that's something you can respond to today. To come home to the one who gives the best kind of love, gave it all for you. A love that is like a mother's love. In fact, maybe that's one of the more incredible things to end on with this passage. Isn't it incredible that when God wants to describe the kind of love that he has in the best way that God can, he draws from the kind of love that mothers show, which is a tender and intense and compassion-filled love. That's what many of us found in our own mothers and grandmothers and those who played that role in our lives. We learn from this passage that God's love is like a mother's love. And the very fact that a mother's love resembles God's love deserves our attention. It deserves our honor. People like our mothers actually help us to know God better through their examples. People like our moms and grandmas can actually help us to honor God better by teaching us his love. A love that we can try to imitate in ourselves because we see in them the difference it makes to give the gift of your presence, to give the gift of your intention in a way that makes people better. People who live like that deserve our honor. And so today we not only remember our greatest calling, which is to honor our God, but also we remember that we ought to honor those who live like our God and love like our God. And for many of us, mom and grandma are people that did that and still do. People that make us better. So let's be sure that we're responsive to that today. Let's be sure and share our appreciation and our honor for that kind of love. And let's also respond to the message that God has for us today. You know, when Jesus was talking about this greatest love that can be shared with another person, Jesus said that greater love has none than that someone would lay down his life for his friends. That's the kind of love we ought to honor in this world. But Jesus also said that the way you honor that kind of love in this world is to show it. Not just to talk about it and think about it and say, oh boy, that's a great way to love, but actually to do it. So right before those words in John 15, when he tells us about the greatest love that can be offered, the one that he's about to show us on the cross, right before that, Jesus says, this is my commandment for you, that you love one another as I have loved you. That's how we truly honor the God who loves us. That's how we truly honor those who help us see the love of God. Through their examples and through their lives, we honor it by imitating it. Doing our best to show it in our lives too. And maybe that's a challenge that you need this morning. Maybe you need to be challenged to try to love with less self-interest, with a little bit more nearness to those who need that love in their lives. Just like we learned from God, and those who show it well. Maybe somebody else needs to respond to the call of the gospel today. To respond to a God who never gives up on his children. Knowing that you can always be set free from your sin and live with him in his home forever. When we're baptized into Christ, we experience the love of God washing us clean, all of our sin washed away. We're transformed into the likeness of Christ, washed clean by his love. However you might be called or challenged this morning, I would invite you to respond to that love with love of your own while we stand and while we sing.